I've been brought up in a culture whereby you see both sides of an argument, or all sides of an argument. Yeah. On the one hand this, on the one hand that. Yeah. And that can be very boring if you're trying to have an exciting, challenging media outlet. But the polarization of society is very worrying indeed.
My name is Nick Nagaka, and you are locked into Culture TV. For the culture, by the culture. Let's go. Michael Crick, thank you very much, mate.
Thank you for having me.
Right, it's just, we had to do the formal intro because people need to know who's on the show. But we're having a really interesting discussion just then about online communications versus personal, physical communications. I'm particularly of a mindset that as human beings, are we designed to just be communicating via screens? You know, we've been here for 200,000 years.
I don't think so. I think we prefer face-to-face. We prefer doing it in person. And my worry is that COVID is going to change the human race in a way. It could well be that we've got a sort of, a moment in evolution where the human race splits into two. And it splits between those who prefer doing everything face-to-face where they can, meeting people, going down the pub, going to proper meetings round a table, and those who prefer sitting at home in front of a screen, ordering all their groceries online, barely getting up from the sofa, and who will, in my view, their limbs will gradually wither, and they'll just become screen creatures. Exactly. And maybe we could have this, have a new world where the human race divides into two. And I know which camp I want to be in. I want to be in the people who are active and who are constantly getting around, seeing people, chatting to people. Having said that, of course, online communications, wonderful. We can do all sorts of things now that we couldn't do 5, 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Like this program we're doing now. Exactly. And the opportunities for greater plurality in journalism are fantastic. Yeah. More voices, more opinions, more ways of looking at things.
Exactly. I think that the beauty of this style of conversation and this style of content is that this is produced independently. We can get it out to as many people as we can push it to.
All over the world.
All over the world, instantaneously. And I think these benefits of the digital revolution, I think are invaluable, but I think there is the downside, and the downside is, are we creating a race of digital zombies who just walk around staring into their phone, playing Candy Crush? What is the next generation of kids going to be like?
Well, my worry is that half the human race will go down that avenue, and the other half will say, hang on a moment, I value getting around and talking to everybody and being active and physically active. And it's a worrying time. But overall, I think developments are positive. There are horrible sides to the internet and everything as well, aren't there? There's a nastiness in a lot of discourse, particularly political discourse. People acting anonymously and saying things anonymously. I try not to respond, for instance, to anonymous tweets. People should have the courage to tweet in their own name. But it's very difficult to regulate any of this unless you have world government. And I'm not sure I'd want world government.
Well, no. Where do you stand on freedom of speech on the internet?
I'm pretty much in favour of it. There are exceptions, but
would Donald Trump be an exception?
Sorry?
Would Donald Trump be an exception?
No, I wouldn't ban Donald Trump. I might. I think. I'm as a journalist, I believe in freedom of expression. Yeah. And I don't agree with much of what Donald Trump says. I think he was a dreadful president. But I think he has his right to say what he thinks. And I think the danger is that if you try and suppress Donald Trump, you are going to anger and alienate the tens of millions of supporters that he undoubtedly has in the United States. And if you suppress people's freedom of expression, you can end up with a lot worse. You can end up with violent revolution. And
I think we've come close to that.
Really?
In America. I think they came close. The fact that you had all of those people storming the Capitol building is, that was unprecedented. Yeah. And violent revolution's extreme, but on one side you've got the woke left versus this radical right, And I feel like as a society, you know, Western society is becoming so much more polarized. And is that to do with how we're being fed information? Is that to do with the algorithm on social media? If you believe, let's say, I mean, I consider myself to be pretty central left-ish, I agree with some right views, but generally I'm pretty down the middle. I'm not really too extreme on either side, but I get fed a lot of left stuff on my timelines, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter in particular. And are we developing these extreme polarizing views because of how we're consuming information and the way that information is being distributed to us? Does that make sense?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, yeah. And I think that people prefer to follow and read people with the same views as them, which I've always thought boring. Yeah. I always want to listen to new views, read new views, have new opinions. I want to have what I believe in challenged. Yeah. And actually, after 40 years in this business, there's a lot of things I don't really have a view on. Yeah. I mean, I write a weekly column for Mail Plus, the main people I work for. And a lot of the time I have to think, well, what actually do I believe on this? Because I've been brought up in a culture whereby you see both sides of an argument, or all sides of an argument. On the one hand this, on the one hand that. And that can be very boring if you're trying to have an exciting, challenging media outlet. But the polarization of society is very worrying indeed. Now, let's be fair. I mean, in the early days of, say, mass newspapers, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, there was a lot of appalling journalism in the 1890s, the early part of the 20th century. And gradually it got better. Sorry?
What do you mean by appalling journalism?
I mean, stories were just made up.
Oh, really?
And there was a lot of fabrication. Nobody ever checked any facts. It was all a lot of supposition. And gradually standards came in and people learned to trust certain outlets and not trust others, or to accept that certain outlets would just make things up, and therefore you could dismiss them. So it's early days yet. Things will evolve, and there will be new outlets that win the trust of the general public. But I mean, of course, the other thing we've got to worry about is hostile, totalitarian, dictatorial foreign governments interfering in our democratic processes, and we've seen signs of that.
How real is that? How real a threat is that, would you say?
I think it's a very real threat. I mean, there's nothing to stop. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that Russia's been doing it already. There's nothing to stop the Russians or the Chinese feeding opinions in, feeding fake news, feeding false information into our political system.
Well, didn't the Brexit campaign, didn't the paper trail lead back to these Russian oligarchs on the Brexit campaign?
Indeed it did. And whether it was enough to make a difference, probably not. But you can see, I mean, even though it was very tight, the referendum, you can see, I think probably these malign influences are going to be more effective in less developed societies where there is less of a plurality of media. To actually, topple, to turn an election in America or in Europe, I think is a much harder proposition when you do have so many traditional existing media outlets. But in a country where there may only be one or two newspapers or one or two radio stations, and you can see how fake rumours can get around so much more quickly and may be effective in an election campaign. How does one regulate that? Very, very difficult indeed.
Do you think was there any evidence found that Donald Trump's claims that the recent election was rigged? Was there even, a year later?
No, but I think we've got to accept that fraud has been much more common in American politics than here. So, for instance, it's widely known that John F. Kennedy's father, stole the election in Illinois in 1960, which was enough to win him the presidency. Lyndon Johnson, when he got first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1948, before he became president, he stole. That people were. Stuffing the ballot boxes in 1948 for Lyndon, and there's huge documentation on this. So there's a lot of fraud that goes on in American elections, and also the boundaries of congressional districts. They have their congressional districts in all sorts of incredibly peculiar shapes in order to allocate the voters in such a way. So all sorts of things go on in American politics that you don't really see so much of in Western Europe. But I think in this particular case, if there was fraud, it probably worked in both directions. And Biden won comfortably enough, I think, for people to be confident of the result.
I think it's a strange one because he doesn't come across like the great. I mean, he's a terrible spokesperson. He can barely string a sentence together.
No, he doesn't speak in normal English, does he?
He's very old. I mean, what is he, 78?
You mean Biden or
Biden?
Sorry, Biden. Yeah, well, they're both. This is the extraordinary thing. You wouldn't have two such old protagonists.
No.
There's a difference in culture. In America, they revere old people in a way that we don't in this country.
Yeah.
Once you reach 60 in British politics, you generally regard as finished. Jeremy Corbyn being the one exception to that. But you're right. Biden is. A very, very inarticulate. I mean, in his heyday, Biden was a lot stronger than he is now. He's been around in American politics for 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary that he's finally reached the presidency at the oldest president ever. Some of his public performances and the way he forgot the Australian Prime Minister's name the other day, Scott Morrison.
Yeah.
That was extraordinary. What did he throw him to? The guy down under, I think you referred to him.
That's what I mean. I mean, Trump was bad. The way he spoke was horrendous, and his division of people was really bad.
Yes.
But this Biden guy, I mean, I don't know much about where he stands on certain issues. He seems to go along with the general consensus of what's popular. But his public speaking ability is literally non-existent. And for 78 years old, it's not going to get any better.
No, which is very surprising. It's assumed now that you've got to be a great communicator to do well in politics.
Yeah.
And of course, Trump was a great communicator in his strange way.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't speak English. He didn't to have normal sentences, but he got the message across.
Yeah. And it resonated with his people he wanted it to resonate with.
And the Democrats didn't have a great wealth of choices for the presidency.
But there's 350 million people
I know.
there. How is this the best?
But I suppose one of the problems is that in American politics, that running for the presidency takes several years. You have to, at least 2 years. You have to sort of prepare for it. You have to raise huge sums of money.
Yeah.
Then you have to go through the whole primary process, which lasts, about 8 months. And then you have the general election. The number of people who are willing to go through all of that, to have their private lives, their business affairs investigated, looked into, which I think is actually perfectly legitimate.
Yeah, of course.
Certainly when it comes to their business affairs, anyway. So it does rather disqualify a lot of people. A lot of people who ran for the presidency in the past would probably never do so today, simply because of all of that, the pressure on your family, the possibility of being assassinated as well. You've got about 4 American presidents, I think it is, have died, have been assassinated. So all in all, that rather narrows the field. And I suppose there must be a strong chance that Kamala Harris, the vice president, will end up being president either at the next election or before then.
I can't see him getting through 4 years.
Well, he probably has a lot better healthcare than you are. Well, certainly than I have.
Yeah, he probably does. Yeah. What do you make of the current state of affairs here in the UK? Do you think there is any hope for Labour to get back into the race with this?
I think Labour are in a really bad state right now. But politics is a strange thing.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn responsible for that? Do you think?
I don't think Jeremy Corbyn helped.
No, definitely didn't help.
I think, but I think Labour basically hasn't got a good leader. I think Keir Starmer. I mean, he means well.
He seems like a nice guy.
He seems nice, but he's wooden. He lacks warmth. He lacks charisma. What I call charisma is what he's got. And actually, Corbyn did have an ability to excite his party.
Yeah.
So did Blair, of course, from a totally different wing of the party.
Yeah.
In a way that Keir Starmer hasn't got. And the people around Starmer, the other leading Labour figures, none of them are the sort of people to excite you and think, crikey, I'm going to vote Labour again. But the really big problem is that for 120 years, Labour has been a coalition, really, of working class people, predominantly, and middle class intellectual types, people who've gone to universities. And that coalition has held together throughout that time and produced 5 or 6 Labour prime ministers.
Yeah.
And now that coalition has really been split asunder by the whole Brexit debate.
Yeah.
And you've got the metropolitan Remainer types in London and the big cities like here in Manchester. And you've got all of those people in the working class traditional Labour seats, the so-called Red Wall, many of whom have now voted Conservative. And I think will probably never go back to Labour.
Do you think?
And on top of that, you've got the problem of Scotland. Labour was almost totally wiped out in Scotland at the last election. Labour has always needed Scotland.
Yeah.
It's very rare that Labour's won an election solely in England and Wales. So if you add all that together, I personally can't see Labour ever being a government in this country again on its own.
Really?
I can see it going into government perhaps with, the Lib Dems and the SNP and the Greens. But of course, the SNP and Scotland may not be around much longer. There must be a very strong chance that Scotland will go independent within the next 10 or 20 years. So Labour's prospects are not great. Having said that, in a two-party system, which essentially we are, a first-past-the-post system, things tend to swing backwards and forwards. So eventually people get fed up with the Conservatives and they think, oh, we'll try Labour again. Yeah. But I think it'll take a new, young, charismatic leader that we've never met yet.
Andy Burnham?
I don't really think it. I mean, Andy Burnham stood in. Remember, Jeremy Corbyn beat Andy Burnham.
Yeah.
I was looking at the figures this morning. I think Burnham got about 17% and Corbyn got 60-something.
Yeah.
But
he's had a lot more profile.
He has had a lot more profile. Yeah. I think. Mind you, he's had some, problems with local problems with the police, for instance. In terms of, I don't think Burnham will. I mean, Burnham may become Labour leader, but I don't think Burnham will become a Labour prime minister.
Do you not think?
I think it will be somebody that nobody's ever. It's probably somebody who isn't even an MP yet.
Really?
And the thing about modern politics is that we've seen it in America, we've seen it in this country, and in France.
Yeah.
That people suddenly emerge. From being totally unheard of, and then 18 months later they're president or prime minister or president of France or whatever. And that's all part of the internet age as well, the speed of which people emerge. Of course, that has dangers in itself, because it means that people become president or prime minister without really the proper scrutiny of who they are and whether they're crooks or not.
Do you think we're destined for a Conservative government for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Probably not as long as that, but I think... I said when Boris Johnson was elected that he'd be Prime Minister for 8 years.
You think
I think that's about... I think I'd stick with that figure.
Yeah.
I mean, Rishi Sunak, who's the obvious successor, is going to be pretty fed off if it's that long.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he may not be as popular.
Yeah. Will he stick
in a matter
around
of months
in politics?
From now. Sorry?
Will he stick around in politics
Indeed.
that long?
Maybe not.
He's very wealthy.
He is very wealthy, in which case he doesn't really need to make much more money then, does he? But
well,
although to be fair, it's mostly his wife's wealth, not his own. But and Rishi Sunak, I mean, with the way the economy is right now, there's just so many unknowables.
Yeah.
His popularity may not last. So goodness knows. The other amazing thing is just how there is no appetite right now for a centre party. I mean, the Lib Dems are nowhere either. I mean, okay, they won the Chesham and Amersham by-election.
Jo Swinson ruined them.
She didn't do them any favours. I think the amazing thing about the Lib Dems is that for 60 years they've survived. They've always had, even though they generally only about a dozen MPs, they've always had somebody who's quite charismatic and sticks out. You know, Charlie Kennedy or Paddy Ashdown or in the old days Jeremy Thorpe, which most of your viewers won't remember. But they've always had somebody who's excited the public. Yeah. And suddenly they've got nobody now. I mean, Ed Davey, he's a nice enough guy, but
is he the leader?
He's pretty dull. Yeah, Sir Edward Davey. Yeah, he is the leader. The fact you have to ask shows the sign of the problem.
I wasn't sure. I mean, I know that in the last election, Jo Swinson didn't even get re-elected as an MP.
No.
I mean, that's pretty shocking. And the leader of the Liberal Democrats
I know. And
has she just got a normal job now? What does she do?
I don't know what she's doing. She scored an own goal by, talking about how, we'll soon have a Liberal Democrat government, which, everybody just thought was a laugh.
Well, the thing is, they had a little bit of momentum building, didn't they, for a moment during the Brexit crisis?
Yes.
And they had an opportunity to make a second referendum happen by putting Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street under a government of national unity to get this process sorted. She didn't take that opportunity, and in the result of that is that we will now have Boris
Johnson. And of course, the Lib Dems and Labour also voted to have a general election.
Yeah.
Which
they must have known they were going to get destroyed in.
I know, but they always think, oh no, we'll be okay.
Do you think it was just hopeless optimism that?
Yeah.
Because that result at that last general election. Well,
of course, in Labour's case, the previous general election, 2017, where Labour started off, massively behind the Conservatives and almost caught them up by polling day in 2017.
Yeah.
They all thought, all the Corbyn and his people thought the same would happen again.
Yeah.
But of course, no two elections are alike. Yeah.
No, I mean, I was shocked at how, was it 215 seats they got in the end?
Who?
Labour?
Labour got 190, 198, 199.
Wow.
Yeah, just below the 200 mark, yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty shocking. Is that the worst result ever for them?
It's the worst result since the 1930s, yeah.
Since the 1930s?
Yeah.
Good God.
And, I always think that if, a lot of these places, these are people who've always voted Labour.
Yeah.
Their parents voted Labour, their grandparents, all the neighbours and friends voted Labour.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've done it once, and I think what actually happened is that some of them, they voted Brexit. And then they sort of knew that was not a Labour policy, and then they voted maybe for UKIP or the Brexit Party. So they sort of gradually left the Labour Party, and the sky didn't fall in for them, and so they've now got used to not voting Labour, and they've suddenly discovered that all their neighbours have done the same thing. They too have deserted the Labour Party,
or stopped voting at all.
Yeah, or stopped voting at all.
I didn't vote.
Yeah, and and of course. Labour has depended on working class solidarity and loyalty in these areas, that people would vote Labour no matter how badly the local council performed or whatever.
Yeah.
And now people are thinking, well, hang on a moment, we don't have to vote Labour, we've got choice, let's try these other people. It's going to be very, very difficult. Labour's going to have to earn those votes back, whereas in the past, for 100 years, Labour had millions of votes just out of class solidarity.
Yeah.
Well, class is no longer. It's much more complicated and much less. There's much less. We're
becoming more of a classless society, aren't we? As time goes on.
Well, yes and no. It's complicated.
It is.
But I think people feel a lot fewer class loyalties.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people. You talk to them in those areas, and they'll say Labour took us for granted.
Yeah.
And frankly, they did.
Yeah. I think it's
Labour would say, well, we don't need to worry about working class people because they'll vote for us anyway.
Yeah.
And what we've got to do is concentrate on getting more middle class votes, which was sort of the approach of the Blair-Brown government. Well, that backfired because what happened was a lot of Labour people stopped voting, as you said, and then they started dilly-dallying, experimenting with other parties like UKIP and the Brexit Party, and voting for Brexit. And one thing led to another.
Brexit Party did. I think in the end, they didn't actually do that very well in the election, did they?
No, not at the last election. No. I mean, the great irony is that when we were in the European Union, you used to have these European elections every 5 years, and they were conducted under proportional representation. So people like UKIP and the Greens would get loads of European MEPs elected, and that brought in money from the European Parliament and status, and they get interviewed in the media, and that gave them a big boost. And the UKIP would never have got anywhere if it wasn't for elections to the European Parliament. It's the great irony. And now, of course, we're no longer in the European Parliament, so you no longer have these elections, no longer bringing in the money and the status and so on. And so it's going to be much, much harder in future for small parties to emerge and get
people
anywhere.
like Nigel Farage to get the attention that
Farage has effectively retired from
politics.
From politics in the sense of standing in politics. He's still, he's got his own television show every night, and he's still, and broadcasting is a new career for him, and he's a very good broadcaster in my view. But he will still try and have influence. He wants to be a broadcaster with influence.
Yeah.
And I think he will have an appeal to many of those people who used to vote for his parties.
Yeah. So you're writing a book on Nigel Farage at the moment.
Yeah, it's very nearly finished. Yeah. It's called, in fact, One Party After Another, because you got, he was a Conservative to start with, then UKIP, then the Brexit Party.
Yeah.
And
he was a Conservative to start with.
Yes, he was a member of the Conservative Party when it was, and not only that, he even voted Green. Well, in the 1989 European elections, he voted Green.
Really?
But in those days, the Greens believed in leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
Virtually every party in British politics has believed in leaving the European Union at one point or another.
Right.
And I mean, it is an extraordinary life.
Yeah.
It's not been done with his cooperation. It's not as they say, authorised biography. It's
Have you interviewed him for it?
No. I've interviewed him many times for other things in the past, and I know him. And I had a conversation briefly with him about one particular aspect of him after I was doing an interview for Mail Plus. But no, when I write a biography, I like to I don't like to get too close to the subject, because I feel if you do, you become obliged to them, beholden to them. And I like to keep a certain distance from the subject, but then try and speak to as many people as I can who are around them. And
does he know you're doing it?
Oh, of course he did. I mean, frankly, if the person didn't know you were writing a book about them, then it wouldn't be a very good book. But no, the first thing I did was out of courtesy to tell him. Yeah. Because I don't want to alienate him. Yeah. I mean, the ideal situation is for when you're writing a biography. I've done about half a dozen now. Is for the person to know and to not stop their friends from talking to you. Right. That's the in other words, no cooperation but no obstacles is the sort of the right formula. And in Farage's case, well, some of his friends did speak, some didn't. Yeah. Some of his friends were very, very helpful and said a lot of interesting stuff, and others were a bit cagey. But I mean, there's no shortage of material, shortage at all.
Is he going to like it?
I think there will be things in there that he'd be quite pleased about, and there'll be quite a lot in there he won't be very pleased about. And there's probably one or two instances where he thinks, "Oh, thank goodness that isn't in." But I don't always know what they are. I mean, there are certain things that you can't prove or you can't get to the bottom of. But I'm a very old-fashioned broadcaster in that I was taught to believe that you should, on the one hand is, on the other hand, I take that attitude into my books. That, there are good things to say about somebody, you've got to say them, and there are bad things, you've got to say that, because if you don't say the good things, then that undermines what you say on the other side. And I mean, I had an editor in my early days at ITN, Sir David Nicholas, and he used to say, right, if we get an exclusive interview with God, then the first thing the news desk has got to do is ring up the devil and give him the right to reply. Wow. And so I do like to be even-handed and balanced. And I suspect there'll be some people who say I've been too balanced.
So you were one of the founders at Channel 4.
That's
back
right.
In the day.
Well, I was very, very junior, very, very minor member of the team. Way back in 1982. Yeah.
And how do you feel Channel 4 is? I mean, you only left there 2 years ago, right?
Yes.
How has it changed since?
It's changed a lot. I mean, there are.
Are its core values still the same?
Not really. No. I mean, I think Channel 4 was meant to be an intelligent and different channel. That it was meant to cover stories in a different way and to cover the plurality of opinions. And I felt that Channel 4 News had veered too much in one direction, too much in a sort of left anti-government, anti-Brexit direction, and I think that was a mistake. And I think the channel as a whole, a naked attraction. I mean, that is not what Channel 4 was meant to be all about. I think they have gone in the wrong direction over the years, and of course now they're threatened with privatisation by the government, who don't like Channel 4, particularly don't like Channel 4 News and some of the other. There's not much other journalism left on Channel 4 these days, but there's a lot less than there used to be. I think that it is a response to the nature of the channel politically.
Was that why you left?
It was one of the reasons. I mean, I was unhappy about it. I thought it would become the program would become campaigning and crusading. And I think that one of the problems that we've had throughout broadcasting, and this is not a particularly novel point, is that too many people in broadcasting, traditional broadcasting, are from middle class, university educated, liberal, metropolitan backgrounds. Yeah. And that outlook comes through in the output. Yeah. And that's why, on the whole, we got Brexit wrong. You know, nobody really, hardly anybody in broadcasting saw Brexit coming. No. I mean, I'd gone around the country quite a lot in the referendum campaign, and I thought about 3 weeks beforehand that's probably the way it was going to go. Did you? But I didn't. I was sort of a bit cautious about saying so, because you can look a twit if you call it wrong. But I think if you went round the country, particularly the areas we've been talking about, sort of red wall type areas, you couldn't help but be notice the amazing numbers of people that said that they were going to vote for Brexit. Yeah. But no one really knew what they were voting for. No. Well, a lot of it was. No, I mean, and a lot of it was nothing to do with the European Union. It was to give. It wasn't just about giving the government a kick. It was about giving the establishment a kick, wasn't it? I mean, was it a racist vote? There would have been a few racists in there, but I don't think it was predominantly a racist vote. No, I think there were lots of people who were concerned about levels of immigration, particularly in certain areas where some of the East Europeans that came to this country did congregate in certain towns and cities, certain parts of the country, and people found it difficult to get jobs. But I mean, I had a cameraman who said he was going to vote for. This was a cameraman at Channel 4 News who said he was going to vote for Brexit. In fact, one of the few people on the show who actually said they were going to vote Brexit, and he said he was going to do so because of house prices. Huh? And I said, well, what's that got to do with Brexit? He said, well, I don't know. I'm just unhappy. My wife and I are very unhappy about it, and we want to give somebody a kick. And I think, there was an element of wanting to give people a kick. And I think that the Remain side did really badly, not just during the campaign, but for 20 years. Yeah. People who believed in the European Union hadn't gone out and sold it properly. Yeah. I mean, there were 2 or 3 politicians, Ken Clarke, Peter Mandelson, Michael Heseltine, who would put a positive case for membership of the European Union. But they were pretty scared to do so. And I think people were frightened, mainstream politicians were frightened that if they went out and tried to sell the European Union and explain why it was a good thing, that they'd be attacked by the Murdoch press or the Mail or whatever, Telegraph. I think you don't lose an election just in the 6 weeks of the campaign. You lose an election over years, decades, and the case for the European Union, membership of the European Union, was never properly sold, in my opinion, and that's why. I had no idea how entwined we were with the European Union until Brexit. Watching, the news and seeing how closely all of our laws and policies and food and just all of these, there were so many different areas to our life and society that are so entwined with the European Union, that to leave was actually a much bigger deal than I think any of the public had quite fathomed at the time of the vote. I mean, we were seeing things like 350 million for the NHS. They're coming to take your jobs. These are the sort of headlines, very simplified, sort of big, scary, bold taglines that were designed to motivate people to vote leave. But the actual complexities of what Brexit was, no one explained that.
No one told us how.
And we're now seeing the aftermath.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll settle down over the years.
Has it been as bad though? Because they did say the world will stop.
Well, it's difficult, of course, because we've been through the whole COVID crisis. So disentangling what is a Brexit effect and what is a COVID effect, or what might have happened anyway, is very difficult. I mean, this whole thing about the shortage of lorry drivers.
Yeah.
Is that due to Brexit, or is it because lorry drivers felt I did a film about this a couple of weeks ago, and I spoke to a lot of lorry drivers, and they said, look, nobody. It's a horrid job to do these days. Everybody treats you like dirt. Wherever you go, you're the lowest of the low. You spend, there's so much regulation. Some of it European regulation, some of it British regulation. If we transgress, we get fined, not the company.
Oh, really?
So as a result, so many lorry drivers, they tend to be older people rather than younger people. And is it? And then you could say, well, yeah, because of Brexit, there aren't all these European lorry drivers here. But you could argue, well, that's not really as a result of Brexit. It's because the government has not relaxed its immigration policies to allow those Europeans to carry on working here and driving lorries around this country. So it's very, very difficult to disentangle. I mean, I voted Remain. Yeah. I can say it now because I'm not a mainstream broadcaster in the way I was when I was with Channel 4 News.
Yeah.
I don't feel passionately about the European membership of the European Union. I mean, if I could reverse the decision just by pressing a button and nobody know it was because of me, then I'd do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite possible that in 20, 30 years' time, when I'd probably be dead anyway, but 20 or 30 years' time, that you and your generation will say, actually, it worked out all right. That it was a good thing because it forced us to act more independently and go out into the world and do all sorts of things that we perhaps wouldn't have done because we felt constrained. So it's possible it will work out, but I don't think it will. I think it will turn out to be a mistake. But I'm not one of these people who thinks it's it's the end of civilization as we know it.
Yeah, I think the combination of COVID and Brexit at the same time. It's just a disaster waiting to happen, wasn't it?
And also, COVID is bringing about so many lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
I mean, we discussed some of them earlier, but I think COVID is also making a lot of people reassess their lives.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have sort of realised that they could actually live on a fair bit less money than they needed because they had to. Yeah. There wasn't anything to spend it on for a long time during lockdown, and I think a lot of people, particularly my generation, will effectively have chosen to retire early, do less work,
and enjoy life.
Enjoy life, exactly. I think perhaps we got obsessed with earning money, working, to the exclusion of all the other good things in life. So maybe COVID will be for the better in a way, in those regards. But it's I think a lot of people have also used COVID as an excuse to make people redundant, to reorganise their firms in ways that may not be a good thing, and to do a lot more stuff online.
So where can people see your new show that you have every week?
Well, it's a film. It's on Mail Plus.
Yep.
Which I know it sounds like a porn channel.
Yeah.
But it's MAIL. It's part of the Daily Mail Mail on Sunday group.
Yeah.
And the films go up every Wednesday lunchtime.
Every Wednesday lunchtime.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying it?
Oh, love it. I mean, it's hard work, and I don't have a producer or a researcher. I have to do all that myself.
You're doing it all yourself?
Yeah, which is great in a way, because I'm returning to the sort of jobs that I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
And whereas in the later years with Newsnight and Channel 4
you'd have a
news,
bit of a team,
I tend to rely on other people. And maybe I got a bit lazy, a bit flabby. And also I had to learn how to do it during lockdown. Yeah. So there was a point when a lot of my films were produced from my attic.
Yeah. Oh, really?
And I would just go out for a quick piece to camera in the park.
Yeah.
And I do all done on Zoom interviews and so on. I mean, it didn't look great at the time, but it was better than not doing a film at all. Yeah. And so I've learned how to learn new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key to this kind of work, and indeed the key to life. We're constantly renewing and learning new ways of doing things. And I mean, I feel I've got as much energy as I had when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I've got all sorts of thoughts in mind for future books and other projects.
Would you do a podcast?
Yep. If I wouldn't know how to go about doing a podcast, but if I'd love to do it. I love listening to podcasts. It's funny, isn't it? Really, it's a bit like. If somebody had said to me, "Oh well, it's you're going to get an audio recording for half an hour or an hour of discussion," I'd say, "Well, what's the difference between that and a radio program?" Which essentially there isn't a difference. But I would have said, "Oh, well, that idea is never going to really work. People will just carry on listening to radio." But it has worked.
Yeah.
A bit like nobody would have ever, if I'd lived in the 1830s and somebody said, "Well, we've got this idea for these two rails that will go hundreds of miles, and you put these carriages in a row, and we'll call it a train." Well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But these ideas, some ideas do work.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about, like, in the 1830s, if they were to see what we have now, it would be magic. They would think it was like, if we showed them an iPhone in the 1830s, they wouldn't be able to believe their eyes.
I know, but the people in the 1830s, I mean, the first passenger railway was Liverpool to Manchester.
Oh, really?
Yes. And and if they knew that the journeys on that railway can take up to an hour sometimes, they'd be amazed, wouldn't they?
And when was that? The first Liverpool to Manchester?
You've got to be on 1830-ish, wasn't it?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was the first passenger train?
And indeed, the first fatality as well. An MP, Huskinson, whose name was killed, and the train didn't go very fast, but people weren't as aware of the danger of trains in those days. It
would have been a steam engine, I suppose, back then.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for this today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for having me.